program. I went on a long solo road trip, backpacking trip, which I do sometimes, and I brought this book with me. It's Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, which I've been reading on and off for about 10 years, and I still don't understand it, Song of Myself, but I'm getting a little closer to understanding, I like to think. And kind of unexpectedly, I ended up quoting some of the poem in my thesis. It snuck in there. And so it's 52 verses. Verse 51, near the end, he asks the question, do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. And I felt like that had a lot to do with what I was exploring in this thesis. So this topic is one that I stumbled on by following my curiosity, which I do often. I didn't really know where it was going to lead, and I'm not really sure if it led anywhere beyond a conversation. But from my experience of having some really good conversations, the participants are changed by the encounter. So there's no doubt that my perspective has been changed by engaging in this particular conversation. One of the most interesting concepts I've taken away from Jungian depth psychology and my time at Pacifica is that of the tension of the opposites. Simply put, it involves holding two seemingly opposing ideas in mind without choosing or acting upon either. After some time of holding this tension of the two, something emerges called the transcendent function, which is a third previously unimagined possibility born from the tension of the two. So for my thesis, I chose to put two seemingly opposing myths of self in conversation with one another. On one end, the self-concept of individualism, a separate and boundaried individual subject undergoing the Jungian process of individuation, during which a person becomes more and more differentiated from the whole as they develop through the lifespan. On the other hand, I explored the myth of an ecological self, a self-concept based on inherent interconnection, and as the late Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh termed, interbeing. According to this idea, derived first from Buddhist philosophy and then later from general systems theory, there is no such thing as a separate self. There is no clear boundary between where I end and the world begins. We are porous. Behind me or next to me is an image in nature that corresponds with the Buddhist metaphor of Indra's net. This metaphor represents a sort of holographic view of the universe, so that each being is at the node of each being is at each node of the net, with each jewel reflecting all the others, reflecting back and catching the reflection. This image implies that each node represents an individual inextricably bound to an interconnected web, with each part also reflecting the whole. It is this image that also inspired my initial inquiry into this topic. So basically, through exploring stages of psychological development along the path of individuation, my research aimed to explore a theoretical way forward to a more expansive and less constricted ecological self-concept, using boundaries as a container for determining what is inside and what is outside the self. According to Jung, a person becomes a self through the process of individuation, or, quote, the total experience of wholeness over an entire lifetime, during which the person moves toward becoming a unified but also unique personality, an individual. The process of complete reunification and wholeness is never fully reached as a destination, but as a journey of approaching and becoming that is continued over a lifetime. Jung discussed several stages along this path, and although he concluded at stage 5, which he described as occurring during the second half of life, during which a person's ego boundaries expand to include more of their previously unconscious experience, He officially stopped at this stage, but he acknowledged the theoretical possibility of those born and raised within our industrial growth culture to advance beyond to a, quote, possible stage of consciousness that takes into account the wider ecological relation between psyche and the world, end quote. So, through the process of individuation, Jung acknowledged the development of consciousness toward a more ecological self as a possibility for the future. Buddhist scholar Joanna Macy and others in the deep ecology movement advocate for the myth of the ecological self, or the, quote, greening of the self, both as a way towards liberation from a more constricted, limited, and isolated way of being in the world, but also as an essential step toward more reciprocal engagement with and care for the world, particularly the natural world. The perceptual shift that Macy and others are advocating for is an expansion of personal identity, which includes the interconnected web in which we live. When one's I includes not only ourselves and our immediate family, but also the trees, the animals, the ocean, and the larger ecological web with which we are very much a connected part, it follows that we will care for these differently than if we consider these to be separate or alien from ourselves and our self-interest. However, as I researched, I uncovered a criticism of this perspective coming from the philosophy of ecofeminism, which essentially considers it presumptuous to imagine that I and the tree outside are one and the same, that the tree is part of me and my identity. Rather, ecofeminism argues that it is more important for me to acknowledge myself and the tree as separate, as selves in relation to one another, that it is the relationship, the contact, the web between the nodes that is most essential. Ecofeminist Val Plumwood wrote, quote, conducting our relationships ecologically means granting to yourself the full extent of your aliveness by allowing others to exist fully in theirs. She continued, if I see myself as indistinct from you, or you as not having your own being that is not merged with mine, then I cannot preserve a real sense of your well-being, as opposed to mine. Care and understanding require the sort of distance that is needed in order not to see the other as a projection of self, or self as a continuation of the other. Through this recognition of interdependence, a person can avoid the problems that result from a collapse of relationship into sameness and the reduction of the other as an extension of the self. It is through recognition and awe of otherness that relationship develops. So this research is clinically applicable for those who struggle with limiting self-identities and who suffer from related dysfunctions and disorders such as depression, anxiety, narcissism, and addiction, essentially the struggles of the modern citizen. Eco-psychologist Andy Fisher wrote, quote, psychopathology tends toward a constricted, unfree, contact-impoverished existence, end quote. Healthy living requires a continuous and flexible balance between contact and expanding self-knowledge. So in conclusion, I am again back at holding the tension of the opposites. Reading from my thesis, quote, an individual is faced with a daunting and paradoxical task: to individuate along the path of life, becoming more and more differentiated, while also becoming more and more consciously identified with a larger and larger self. This larger self becomes the foundation from which to relate to another in their distinct, differentiated otherness. The self includes and is at the same time separate from the other. Through holding the tension of these two opposing ideas, a transcendent function emerges, providing a higher perspective and greater possibilities for collective human consciousness, end quote. So I will finish with, so full circle, I guess, the final lines from Song of Myself, verse 52. Whitman writes, the spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my gab and my loitering. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you, nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere, waiting for you.